Intermittent fasting has recently exploded in popularity, driven by claims of rapid weight loss, improved mental health, and even reversal of chronic diseases. But is intermittent fasting as miraculous as it's purported to be, especially when it comes to fat loss? What does the science say? And are there any downsides? And if it does work, what are the best science-backed practices? We're going to explore this and much more starting now. A fascinating study was conducted by the Salk Institute for Biological Studies. Scientists tracked the eating habits of a group of adult test subjects to see how often the average person actually eats. The researchers discovered that not only does the average person not eat 3 square meals a day, most people tend to eat more sporadically throughout the day, more of what would be considered snacking. The scientists also noted that the average time between the first bite of food someone eats to start the day and the last bite of food that they have at the end of the day was about 15 hours. Now, this is very important to understand. The average person is eating something over a span of more than 15 hours a day. Throw in some sleep, and that eating window is open pretty much while people are awake and able to chew. The scientists decided to see what would happen if they simply shortened the window of eating for some of the test subjects. There were no other dietary restrictions given. No restrictions on calories, macronutrient ratios, or anything else. They simply had the study participants reduce their window of eating to 10 to 12 hours a day. And here's what happened. After 16 weeks, the study participants lost an average of over 7 pounds. They subjectively reported that they were sleeping better and that they were experiencing a lot more energy. An analysis of their diets uncovered that they naturally reduced their calorie intake by about 20%, even though there were no calorie restrictions that were placed on them. They were losing weight, eating foods that they enjoyed, and experiencing a lot more energy. It may sound too good to be true on the surface, and it may seem like a simple result of consuming less calories. But there's a lot more going on behind the scenes. The combined sporadic eating and the wide window of eating that the average person initially had was leading to what the researchers called metabolic jet lag. And by compressing their eating window, they were creating epigenetic changes to their metabolism by influencing their circadian timing system. When I was studying biology in college, very little education went into learning about our circadian clocks, also referred to as our biological clocks. In fact, it was essentially glossed over. The circadian timing system is defined as the network of interconnected cellular structures that regulate the timing of physiological processes and behavior. The circadian clocks that exist within our trillions of cells control the release of various hormones and neurotransmitters, digestive function, including our rate of nutrient absorption, speed of food transit throughout the GI tract, elimination, and more. Circadian clocks also influence the behavior of our microbiome. Keep in mind that our trillions of bacteria that live in and on our bodies have circadian clocks too. In fact, a recent study cited in the journal Nature Reviews Endocrinology states, quote, disruption of the circadian system can alter microbiome communities and can perturb host metabolism, energy homeostasis, and inflammatory pathways, which leads to metabolic syndrome, unquote. Now, getting back to our human cells, these circadian clocks also help regulate our blood pressure, thermal regulation, sleep efficiency, muscular strength and reaction time, reproductive cycles and production of sex hormones, mental alertness, mental acuity, and so much more. Now, if you're wondering what these biological clocks actually are they like some big clocks sitting in the middle of our cells like a Flavor Flav necklace? As cool or as scary as that might be, these biological clocks are actually something far more fascinating. Researchers at the Salk Institute for Biological Studies have uncovered that our biological clocks are themselves functional genes and proteins that control and influence all of our other genes and proteins. Now, the question is, how does intermittent fasting connect with all of this? A recent study published in the British Journal of Nutrition provides an eloquent description regarding eating and our circadian system. The scientists stated, quote, the human circadian system anticipates and adapts to daily environmental changes to optimize behavior according to the time of day. At the helm of this system is a master clock in the suprachiasmatic nuclei, the SCN of the anterior hypothalamus. The SCN is primarily synchronized to the 24-hour day by the light and dark cycles. However, feeding and fasting cycles are the primary time cues for clocks and peripheral tissues. Aligning feeding and fasting cycles with clock-regulated metabolic changes optimizes metabolism and suggests that feeding at inappropriate times disrupts circadian system organization and thereby contributes to adverse metabolic consequences and chronic disease development, unquote. How could adhering to healthier feeding and fasting cycles have such a profound impact on our health? Well, scientists at the Salk Institute discovered that upwards of 80% of our genes follow a circadian rhythm. The simple act of intermittent fasting is changing our health at the level of our genes. These insights help to explain why adherence to a healthier circadian clock led the participants in the Salk Institute study to, yes, lose some weight, but also feel more energetic and have better sleep quality, even though they were eating less food. The next questions are, what are these alterations in our gene expression actually controlling? And how does this control our body's ability to burn fat? Let's start with the metabolic elephant in the room that's ramped up during times of fasting. With the increased popularity of intermittent fasting, many practitioners, scientists, and everyday folks alike are attributing a lot of its big benefits to the actions of autophagy. The term autophagy is from the Greek root auto, meaning self, and phagy, meaning eating. It might sound kind of weird, but this is pretty much what it's like when autophagy is kicking in our bodies. Here are just a few of the things that autophagy is involved with in the human body. Maintaining overall cell homeostasis, recycling and replacing damaged organelles. Organelles refer to all the little parts of the cell, from the mitochondria to the ribosomes to the nucleus. Yes, even the nucleus, the control center of our cells that safeguard our DNA, undergoes autophagy. Additionally, autophagy removes damaged or misfolded proteins, and it aids in overall cellular cleanup to remove damaged parts that can accumulate and make room for healthy growth and function. Without adequate autophagy, old and damaged cell parts can accumulate within the cell, increasing the risk of everything from inflammation to degenerative diseases. Again, one of the most remarkable aspects of autophagy is that the cell parts that autophagy breaks down can be recycled and used to make new, healthier organelles. Also, the broken down parts can be used to make energy to run processes in our bodies. How incredible is that? This goes beyond the paradigm of our bodies using stored glycogen and stored fatty acids as fuel during times of fasting. Autophagy can create available energy from the junk that it cleans up during housekeeping. This junk removal and recycling is so impactful on metabolism that a study titled Targeting Autophagy in Obesity, published in the journal Nature Reviews Endocrinology, details how autophagy is a powerful force in sustainable weight loss. The researchers stated that autophagy enacts, quote, cellular quality control through the disposal and recycling of cellular components and the maintenance of cellular homeostasis and organ function by selectively ridding cells of potentially toxic proteins, lipids, and organelles, unquote. They go on to state, quote, defects in autophagy homeostasis are implicated in metabolic disorders, including obesity, insulin resistance, diabetes, and atherosclerosis, unquote. This speaks to the power of autophagy to clean out the metabolic clutter and make sure that things are working efficiently. But is autophagy really notable for the intermittent fasting related fat loss benefits? Well, on the surface, autophagy can be supportive of overall energy metabolism, but so can a lot of other things. What we do know that leans towards fat loss support when it comes to autophagy is that autophagy can have a significant effect on insulin signaling. It can support insulin sensitivity, healthy fasting insulin levels, and protect against the overexpression of several aspects of insulin production and energy storage. For instance, a recent meta-analysis published in the journal Clinical Diabetes and Endocrinology states that, quote, the majority of the available research demonstrates that intermittent fasting is effective at reducing body weight, decreasing fasting glucose, decreasing fasting insulin, reducing insulin resistance, decreasing levels of leptin and increasing levels of adiponectin, unquote. The results were so strong that the researchers stated, quote, current evidence suggests that intermittent fasting is an effective, non-medicinal treatment option for type 2 diabetes, unquote. Again, this was found to be true in most intermittent fasting studies, but not all of them. Though even when studies didn't find notable differences in things like body weight and fasting glucose, a meta-analysis published in 2023 affirmed that intermittent fasting consistently lowers fasting insulin for participants. Now, why does insulin regulation matter so much when it comes to fat loss? Well, here's what my friend and colleague, metabolic scientist Dr. Ben Bigman, shared with me about insulin and our fat cells.
You cannot have a fat cell grow unless insulin is elevated. It is totally, completely, utterly impossible. Now, I know people want to say, oh, well, calories matter too. They do matter. But if you just take out that one single variable, if you deprive a fat cell of insulin, it cannot grow. 100% full stop. Take this as from a guy who literally grows fat cells in my lab all the time.
Without the activity of insulin, you cannot store more fat. And when insulin levels are reduced, your body can shift from a fat storing mode to a fat burning mode more effectively. Yes, autophagy definitely has an impact on insulin, but so do a whole host of other things, from our macronutrient intake to inflammation to our percentage of muscle mass and many other factors. We simply can't pin the fat loss benefits of intermittent fasting squarely on autophagy, but we can't negate it as well. What we do know from animal studies is that when autophagy is removed from the metabolic equation, weight loss is slowed down in a calorie deficit, and weight gain is sped up when in a calorie surplus. In a 2017 study published in the journal Cell Death and Disease, scientists noted that by blocking the activity of autophagy through both genetic and pharmacological interventions, weight loss was slowed down when mice were put into a fasted state, and weight gain was accelerated when mice were given calorie surplus diets. And here's what was especially interesting about this study. In another part of the study, the scientists placed the mice on what they referred to as a pro-obesity regimen to see if autophagy would have any effect on their rate of weight gain. One set of mice received a comparable standard American diet with a surplus of calories, while another set of mice were placed on the same diet, but with one key difference. They used a therapeutic polyamine to induce autophagy in this group of mice while on their pro-obesity regimen. Shockingly, the mice with active autophagy seemed to be protected against rapid weight gain. Compared to the placebo group, the autophagic mice, the mice with active autophagy, gained weight much slower than the other mice, remained more insulin sensitive, had slower growth of their fat cells, and had slower growth of visceral fat. This is mind-blowing. Autophagy was found to be protective against obesity for these little critters. But as much as we may love Disneyland, we are indeed not mice. So although autophagy is able to expressly improve the metabolic health of mice, the effects are much more subtle in humans. Unfortunately, there isn't anything magical about autophagy when it comes to fat loss. Autophagy is a part of a much bigger picture that involves an array of hormones, mitochondria, and even changes in gene expression that lead to a higher rate of fat loss. But we absolutely want to respect autophagy for the powerful natural force that it is. Every muggle has this process happening in their body, and we can turn it up or turn it down based on our choices. Now, let's answer the question: are the fat loss benefits of intermittent fasting simply a result of a reduction in calories? Well, we have a couple of great studies to address this precisely. The first one we'll examine was a randomized controlled trial published in 2021. The scientists recruited lean, healthy individuals to analyze the impact of intermittent fasting versus simple daily calorie restriction on weight loss, fat loss, and more. Over the course of the 3-week study, both groups lost weight and lost body fat, but across the board, daily calorie restriction outperformed intermittent fasting. That's right, with closely matching calorie reductions over the course of the study, simply reducing daily calorie intake without using intermittent fasting worked better. But here's where you have to look at the details instead of just window shopping the results. If you look at the type of intermittent fasting that the researchers put people through, you'll notice some unusual patterns. The researchers used alternate day fasting, where they had participants to eat nothing one day, and then the next day, they had them to overeat calories to try to match the calorie intake of the general daily calorie restricted group. So again, they had them to eat no food at all on one day, and then the next day, they had them to significantly overeat. The researchers had them eat 150% of what their daily recommended intake would be, or even 200% of what their recommended daily intake would be in another group. And they had them to do this day after day. What's the metabolic impact of eating absolutely no food one day and then overeating the next day? Yes, they're putting participants in a calorie deficit overall, which will result in some weight loss. But that weight loss will be abnormal because of the dramatic changes in their hormones from one day to the next. One day you're eating nothing and insulin drops while your stress hormones go up. The next day, you're overeating, making insulin shoot up higher than normal, with stress hormones being abnormally affected as well. We can see the metabolic disruption of this type of strategy by the type of weight that was lost. Although both groups lost weight, the daily calorie restricted group lost more body fat, while the alternate day fasting and then overeating group lost significantly more of their lean mass as part of their overall weight loss. This all points to this form of alternate day intermittent fasting seems to be way too stressful on our bodies. This type of fasting is incredibly abnormal. It doesn't adhere to how humans have eaten for thousands of years, nor does it adhere to principles of circadian nutrition and our circadian timing system. If you don't look at the bigger picture, some well-meaning experts can use this to say that intermittent fasting is no better, if not worse for you, than a general daily calorie restriction. But what happens when the type of intermittent fasting isn't as extreme? Well, another study with more reasonable intermittent fasting parameters, and dare I say, are much closer to what humans have done for thousands of years, found much different results. A study titled Calorie Restriction with or Without Time-Restricted Eating and Weight Loss used a more appropriate group to study weight loss in: individuals who are overweight or obese rather than those who are already lean, and they took these test subjects and placed them into two different groups. Over 100 participants were randomly placed into either a general calorie restriction group or a matching calorie restriction group that also utilized intermittent fasting. This time, the intermittent fasting used had a much more approachable daily eating and fasting window, with the participants eating all of their calories within a window from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. daily. Now, here's what happened over the course of the 1-year study period. Participants in the intermittent fasting group lost about 4 more pounds than the general calorie restriction group. The intermittent fasting group lost about 3.5 more pounds of actual fat mass. The intermittent fasting group lost about 5 centimeters more visceral belly fat, and other positive metabolic changes were superior to the general calorie restriction group as well. Interestingly, the researchers stated that these changes were not significant enough to pick a clearly better approach over the long study period. But these numbers are not unremarkable when looking at the big picture of improved metabolic health. Another study titled Time-Restricted Eating with or Without Low Carbohydrate Diet Reduces Visceral Fat and Improves Metabolic Syndrome was published in 2022. This time, the researchers placed over 150 participants with poor metabolic health into one of 3 groups. One group was placed on a general low-carb diet, one group was placed on an intermittent fasting protocol, and the final group was placed on an intermittent fasting plus low-carb diet protocol. Again, this study used more reasonable daily eating and fasting windows. Participants were allowed to choose between an 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. eating window or a noon to 8 p.m. eating window. Whatever fit them best, they were able to do. And the results were astonishing. Over the course of the 3-month study period, all of the 3 study groups lost weight, but the intermittent fasting group lost significantly more weight than the low-carb group, even without adhering to the low-carb diet. But the group who used the low-carb diet and intermittent fasting lost more than twice as much weight as the low-carb group. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. All 3 groups lost a notable amount of subcutaneous fat, but only the intermittent fasting and the intermittent fasting plus low-carb group lost a significant amount of visceral belly fat. Plus, the intermittent fasting and intermittent fasting plus low-carb group significantly improved blood sugar control, dyslipidemia, and other markers of metabolic health compared to the low-carb only group. The impact of intermittent fasting to remedy symptoms of poor metabolic health was so remarkable that the researchers stated, quote, chronic circadian disruption can aggravate the risk for components of metabolic syndrome, and time-restricted eating maintains a robust daily cycle of eating and fasting to support circadian rhythm, unquote. Intermittent fasting, when done intelligently, can support fat loss beyond the superficial benefits of general calorie restriction. It's tapping into the true potential of the circadian timing system that exists within our trillions of cells. So what are the best practices to utilize intermittent fasting for fat loss and metabolic health moving forward? Well, I've got 4 specific things that you need to do, and you can utilize the acronym FAST to remember these 4 simple steps. The F in FAST is for you to figure out your ideal fasting and eating windows. As you've heard, there are many flavors of intermittent fast, from alternate day fast to 5-2 fasting with 5 days of eating followed by 2 days of fasting, to having a daily intermittent fasting window and more. The most approachable, science-backed strategy for most people is using a daily eating and fasting window. Determine what the best eating and fasting windows are for yourself. Based on the data, anything from a 12-hour fast up to an 18-hour fast appears to be ideal for most people. The earlier study noted an 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. eating window or a noon to 8 p.m. eating window for best results. The key is that you've got to pick the time frame that's ideal and sustainable for you. Now, moving on to the A in the FAST acronym. A is for adjust it to fit your lifestyle. One of the most valuable tenets with the daily intermittent fast is consistency. Yes, we want to be consistent, but there is no need to be neurotic. Maybe you're dealing with some short-term schedule changes, changing time zones, or changing your work hours completely. If you want to switch your eating and fasting windows, you absolutely can. You can always open or close your fasting window a little bit more or less based on what's going on for you personally as well. Maybe your eating window is from noon to 8 p.m. Monday through Saturday. But on Sundays, you love to have brunch with your family at 10 a.m. So that day you choose to have your eating window from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. or even 8 p.m. and that's okay. Just find some consistency and a rhythm that works for you, because the rhythm is what it's all about. Now moving on to the S in FAST, which is to safeguard your results with supportive nutrition. The biggest mistake that people make with intermittent fasting is not so obvious. Because you have a specific eating window, there's a natural tendency for many people to eat less food over the course of the day. Not because they have to, but because they feel energetic and satisfied. Eating less food is fine, obviously, but I want to make sure that you're proactive about getting in all the essential nutrients that you need to support your intermittent fasting results and your health overall. When you are eating during your eating window, the quality of the calories you bring in can make all the difference in the world. You want to provide your body with the essential amino acids, essential fatty acids, vitamins, minerals, and other nutrients that optimize your brain, your body, and your overall fat loss. In particular, you want to make sure you're getting in adequate amounts of protein. If you need to expand your eating window in order to get in the adequate amount of protein that you truly need, do it. Ensuring that you're getting in adequate amounts of protein to support fat loss and to protect your valuable muscle is much more important than having an eating window that is too compressed that doesn't allow for you to do that. Also, during your fasting window, making sure that you're hydrated is obviously important. But another great adjunct that supports your fasting window as well is drinking some high quality tea. A study that was recently published in 2024 found that people who regularly drink tea age slower than those who do not. And there are so many varieties of tea that are teeming with health benefits and flavor profiles, from green tea to rooibos tea to ginger tea and so much more. And speaking of anti-aging and anti-obesity effects, a study published in the journal Clinical Interventions in Aging took 59 overweight or mildly obese subjects to see if a traditional tea called pu'er makes a notable difference on weight loss. The randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study had participants to either receive a placebo or pu'er over the course of a 20-week study period. There were no other interventions noted, and here's what happened. Quote, consumption of pu'er was associated with statistically significant weight loss when compared to placebo. Fat loss was seen for arms, legs, and the hip belly region, unquote. The participants who received pu'er lost more overall body fat, but what was especially remarkable is that they maintained more of their valuable muscle mass. The tea that I personally drink most often is pu'er. That's what you usually catch me sipping on. But the only pu'er that I drink is from Peak Life. It's triple toxin screened for purity and made through a patented cold extraction technology that makes it as effective as what was used in the study. It's wild harvested and truly is the best pu'er on earth. Head over to peaklife.com/model right now and you'll receive up to 20% off plus some limited time free bonuses like an electric frother to mix up your favorite beverages. And you get to try Peak Teas risk-free with their 90-day money-back guarantee. You'll either love it or you'll receive a full refund. Now we're at the final piece of your FAST acronym, which is the T for track how you look, feel, and perform. What's the point of doing intermittent fasting or anything else if it doesn't work well for you? The only way we'll know if something is right for us is to test it and track the results. We can use a myriad of objective tests today with wearable devices that track our sleep, heart rate variability, and more. You can also simply rely on some basic measurements. Yes, you can track what the scale says, but in many ways, a more potent reporter of your metabolic health are things like your waist measurement, hip to waist ratio, and tracking your body fat percentage. Or even a simple picture can be worth 1,000 words. Take a photo today and then take another photo after 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days of intermittent fasting to literally see the changes for yourself. Also, and so often overlooked, our experience of better, more consistent energy and a better mood and positive disposition are very primal indicators that our biology is moving in the right direction. You simply cannot manage what you cannot measure. So measure some of these things for yourself. So intermittent fasting is a viable tool affirmed by modern science to support our metabolic health when done right. Please leave me a comment below this video and let me know if you've done any intermittent fasting and what you found works best for you. Now, if you want to dive deeper into this subject of intermittent fasting and look at any contraindications and adjustments with intermittent fasting when it comes to things like women's health, hormones, and even menopause, definitely check out the conversation that I had with the incredible physician and researcher, Dr. Mindy Pelz. Why is fasting different for women?
The outlier for women is progesterone. Progesterone needs glucose in order to be made. So if you are in a fasted state where you are lowering glucose down, at the same time raising cortisol up, progesterone doesn't like cortisol, then you can't make progesterone.